At my mother's birthday party, the air was heavy with the smell of store-bought frosting and soda that had already gone flat in plastic cups, and I was sitting at the far end of the table trying to make myself invisible when my 14-year-old nephew Tyler suddenly stood up with a mischievous look that made the whole room pause. He held a full cup of soda ice clinking, and before I could even guess his intention, he walked directly toward me with the swagger of someone who had been told his entire life that he could do no wrong. He stopped right in front of my chair, looked me dead in the eye, and with a smirk that belonged to someone much older, he said, "Grandma says you don't belong here." Then, without hesitation, he tilted the cup and poured the entire drink into my lap. The liquid was shockingly cold, seeping through my dress, making my thighs sticky with syrup, and the table erupted into laughter. My brother actually clapped like it was a performance. My mother leaned toward her friend and with a chuckle said Tyler just says what is on his mind. The humiliation pressed down on me like a weight. I grabbed a thin napkin from the table, dabbed at my soaked clothes, and that made them laugh louder. I forced a smile, my lips trembling but my voice silent. I did not scream. I did not protest. I did not even look at my mother. I sat there while the laughter echoed, letting them believe I had no reaction, but inside, something shifted. It was not sadness anymore, not even anger. It was clarity. A clarity that had been waiting years to break through the fog of loyalty and guilt. They had never wanted me here. I had always been tolerated, never cherished. Now they had declared it publicly using a child as their weapon. I glanced down at the dark stain spreading across my clothes, and for the first time, I thought not about what I had lost, but about what I still had control over. I excused myself politely after a few more minutes, acting as though nothing had happened, but inside I was already planning my next step. I drove home in silence at the sound of the tires on the asphalt steadier than my heartbeat. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the documents I had signed for my brother months earlier. The family business loan the account balances the leverage I had never used because I was too afraid of being called cruel. My fingers hovered then moved with certainty. By the time the clock struck midnight, my name was gone from the loan. The account was frozen. By morning, the car parked proudly in front of their house would be gone. And at 8 o'clock, just as the sunlight hit my front porch, there would be a knock at my door. My name is Stephanie, and I am 52 years old, the owner of a small coffee and gift shop on the edge of town, a place that has become more than just my livelihood. It has become my anchor. I never imagined that the little store I opened after my daughter's accident would one day be the only family I could count on. When I was growing up, my mother used to say family is everything, but what she really meant was family is what she chooses to protect. And in her eyes, that was always my brother Mike. From the time we were children, Mike was the golden one, the boy who could do no wrong. If he broke a neighbor's window, it was called a childish accident. If I missed curfew, it was a sign of irresponsibility. When he barely graduated high school, Mom celebrated like he had conquered the world. When I earned honors, she barely looked up from her magazine. That pattern never changed. Through college, through my first job, through my marriage, it was always Mike first, Stephanie second. When I married young and had a daughter, I thought perhaps motherhood would finally make my mother see me with pride. But tragedy does not discriminate. My little girl was taken from me in a car accident before she even reached her teens. I remember the silence at her funeral, the way my mother stood stiffly in the corner whispering to one of her church friends while I struggled to breathe. Mike did not even bother to stay the whole service. He told people later that grief made me unstable and that I needed someone to watch over me. Instead of support, I received judgment. Instead of comfort, I received suspicion. My daughter was gone, and in their eyes, my worth had gone with her. When I tried to rebuild, when I poured myself into opening the shop, they dismissed it as a hobby. Yet the shop grew. I built it piece by piece, long hours, late nights. Every penny I had saved and every ounce of energy went into those brick walls and shelves filled with handmade items. Customers came word spread, and slowly the business became stable. I thought maybe then they would respect me, but family dinners proved me wrong. They asked Mike about his failing ventures. They laughed at his stories even when they made no sense. They showered Tyler with gifts. When it came to me, they asked nothing. They cared for nothing. They forgot birthdays, anniversaries, fundraisers. I was invisible unless they needed something. Mike especially learned to lean on me when he was drowning financially. He had no credit, no discipline, but he had a mother who begged me to help him, and I had a heart too soft to refuse. I signed loans for him, co-signed leases, even set up accounts for his wife's boutique because I thought maybe if I did enough, they would finally accept me. Each time I told myself it was family duty, that maybe loyalty would earn me love. But deep inside, I knew it was one-sided. Mom's birthday parties became the clearest stage for this imbalance. Every year, it was less about her and more about Tyler, her golden grandson. She bragged about his grades, about his so-called genius, about how he would get a car the moment he turned 16. Meanwhile, the gifts I brought stayed unopened, the necklace I once spent hours picking out left in the box, while she laughed at Tyler's every joke. One year, Tyler whispered to a friend that I used to be a mom, but failed. Those words reached me through my cousin's child and pierced deeper than any insult. When I told Mike, he brushed it off with boys will be boys. It was not just cruelty. It was cruelty, taught cruelty, encouraged. Yet despite everything, I kept showing up. I kept thinking, maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year my presence would matter. I kept swallowing humiliation because I still believed in the idea of family. But the truth was, each event only carved deeper lines of exclusion. The contrast between the life I built and the way they treated me was sharp. In my shop, I was respected. People sought my opinion. Customers thanked me for creating a welcoming space community. Members invited me to host fundraisers. Outside those walls, I was competent and seen. Inside my family's house, I was an afterthought, a punchline someone to dismiss. That duality wore on me for years. I convinced myself silence was strength. I convinced myself letting go was maturity. Yet every time I wiped away a cutting remark, every time I laughed off being ignored, I was erasing a part of myself. By the time Mom's birthday rolled around this year, the quiet erosion had taken its toll. The invitation itself felt off. Mom called with an unusual sweetness, telling me Tyler wanted to know if I was coming. That should have been my warning. Tyler never asked about me unless he was planning something. The memory of his gaming chair request still stung. He had flattered me with compliments about my cooking only to insult me behind my back days later. I should have known better, but hope makes fools of us all. I agreed to attend, convincing myself it was another chance to prove I belonged. Instead, it became the night they showed me without hesitation that I never did. Sitting at that table soaked in soda, listening to their laughter, feeling my brother clap for his son, hearing my mother excuse his cruelty as honesty, I finally understood. Years of tolerance had earned me nothing. Silence had bought me nothing. That night, clarity replaced hope. That night, the lines were drawn. And that night, as I drove home with the sticky residue on my dress, I knew the era of swallowing humiliation was over. I still had leverage they did not respect. I still had power they pretended did not exist. For once, I would use it. For once, I would not protect them from the consequences of their own actions. For once, I would not be the invisible one at the table. That night, after I drove home from the birthday party, I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the house silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock, and opened my laptop with hands that no longer trembled. For years, I had signed papers for Mike. For years, I had let my name be the safety net that kept him from drowning in his own irresponsibility, and now all I had to do was withdraw that protection. The bank portal blinked at me as I typed my own name sitting beside his on the loan documents, my own credit standing, holding up his fragile empire. It had been my weakness all along the way. I allowed guilt to dictate my decisions. But humiliation has a way of clarifying truth. I clicked the withdrawal, confirmed the action, and felt something shift inside me. By midnight, it was done. My name was gone, the account frozen. I slept with a calm I had not known in years. By morning, the consequences arrived at their doorstep. The car they had bought just months earlier parked proudly in front of their house like a trophy was hooked up to a tow truck by 7:45. I imagined Tyler watching from the window, confused, perhaps even indignant, because no one had ever taught him that actions come with cost. At 8 o'clock sharp, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Mike standing there. his face twisted in panic, poorly disguised as concern. He pushed inside without waiting for an invitation, waving a stack of papers at me. "You need to fix this," he said. No good morning. No mention of the soda. No acknowledgement of the laughter that still echoed in my ears. He shoved the papers into my hands, explaining that the bank had called that the loan was frozen, that if he could not replace me, they would be in breach. I leaned against the doorframe silent. He went on like a desperate salesman, saying the shop would not make rent, that credit cards were overdrawn, that payroll was due, that Mom's insurance needed paying, that Tyler's football fees were next week. His voice cracked, not with remorse, but with entitlement. And then he said the line that sealed everything. "You are doing this over a joke. Not over the soda, not over the years of jabs about my daughter, not over the graffiti, but a joke." He still believed their cruelty was humor, that my pain was entertainment. I shut the door in his face without a word. My phone lit up minutes later with texts first from him, then from his wife, then from my mother. They tried every angle: guilt, confusion, mockery. Tyler sent a TikTok of someone fake crying. No words, just mockery. I turned the phone face down and went on with my day. That evening after closing the shop, I walked into the parking lot carrying groceries and my keys, and the sight that met me stopped me cold. My car had been keyed down both sides, the rear-view mirror kicked off the back window, smashed into a spider web of glass. The stillness in the lot was almost eerie, as though the air itself was waiting for my reaction. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply turned back inside, opened the security feed, and rewound. There they were. Tyler and one of his friend's hoodies pulled up laughing as they filmed themselves. Tyler spray-painted fake aunt across my car window in sloppy red letters, then posed like a performer in some cheap video before kicking over a flower pot for good measure. It was not just vandalism, it was celebration of cruelty. I called Uncle Ray. He arrived in less than 30 minutes, sat with me as we watched the footage in silence. When it ended, he leaned back and said only 3 words. "You are calling the police." I did not argue. I made the call, gave the statement, handed over the footage. The officer was polite but firm, and his words carried weight. This was not the first complaint about Tyler. Property damage at school, other incidents swept under the rug, but this time with video evidence, it would not go away. The next morning, Mike was back, not knocking this time, just pacing across the street like a man waiting for a miracle. When he realized I was not coming out, he began to yell. I could not hear every word, but I caught pieces. "Traitor, heartless. You will regret this." Then Mom called her voicemail, dripping with disappointment. She said I was letting money come between family, that it was just a childish prank. She still did not get it, or maybe she refused to. To her, Mike and Tyler could never be truly at fault. That week, the official charges were filed: vandalism, trespassing, property damage. Because Tyler was a minor, Mike and his wife were pulled in as well. The footage made denial impossible. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes, not when facing me, but when facing accountability. I thought maybe then they would stop. Maybe then the lesson would sink in. But cruelty that has been rewarded for years does not disappear overnight. A few nights later, I returned home to find my store window smashed again, this time a rock lying on the floor with a note rubber banded to it. The words were simple: "You will be alone forever." I picked up the rock, taped the note to my office wall like evidence, and called Uncle Ray again. He came the next morning with a lawyer at his side. "We are pressing full charges this time," he said. "No hesitation, no compromise." For once, I did not argue. The line had been crossed too many times. I realized then that what had started as humiliation over a cup of soda had become something larger: a war over dignity, a battle over whether I had the right to exist on my own terms. Each escalation they threw at me was meant to push me back into silence, to remind me of my place. But each time they pushed, I grew firmer. The more they lashed out, the clearer I saw. They thought because I smiled quietly, I was weak. They thought because I endured, I was powerless. But now the tables were turning. The soda was no longer just a stain. It was the spark that lit the fire of my resolve. They had underestimated me for the last time. When the charges were filed, I thought perhaps the shock would silence them. That facing the police and potential restitution would force Mike and his family to retreat, but instead they doubled down and their attacks grew bolder. The morning after the report was made, I listened to a voicemail from my mother, her voice calm but cold. She said she did not know what had gotten into me, that I was letting money come between family, that Dad would have been ashamed of me. She called it a childish prank again, refusing to see the intent behind it, refusing to acknowledge the humiliation that had started it all. She made it clear where her loyalty lay, and it was not with me. Mike, meanwhile, took to pacing the street across from my store, no longer bothering to hide his anger. He shouted insults, his voice carrying through the quiet morning. I heard the words, "traitor, heartless, and you will regret this," drift across the asphalt as customers passed by pretending not to notice. He wanted a scene, wanted me to rush out and plead, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. At night, the messages flooded my phone. His wife tried guilt, telling me Tyler was just a boy, that ruining his record would ruin his future. She said I would regret it when he could not get into college. Then she tried threats, saying I would regret crossing her husband. My mother chimed in with passive-aggressive notes about forgiveness, about turning the other cheek. But never once did any of them acknowledge the soda, the laughter, the spray paint, the smashed glass. To them, my pain was invisible, only their inconvenience mattered. Word spread quickly through the community. Customers whispered that Mike was telling people I had edited the footage to frame Tyler. One of my vendors told me my mother had visited his shop, warning him that I was unstable and probably headed for another breakdown. It was a coordinated smear campaign designed to isolate me, to make me appear like the unstable one. It stung, but it also confirmed what I had always known: their loyalty was to each other, never to me. The attacks were not just words. One evening after locking up, I returned home to find the front window of my store shattered again. This time, they did not even pretend to hide. A rock sat on the floor with a note rubber banded to it, the words scrawled in black marker, "You will be alone forever." I stared at it not with fear, but with a strange calm. They wanted me rattled, wanted me desperate. Instead, I taped the note to my office wall like another piece of evidence. When Uncle Ray arrived the next morning, I showed him without a word. He studied it, then turned to me with resolve. "Enough is enough," he said. He brought a lawyer with him, a firm man with sharp eyes who laid out the next steps. We would press full charges, not just against Tyler, but against Mike and his wife as well, for harassment, for property damage, for defamation. I agreed without hesitation. The line had been crossed too many times. The lawsuit became official, a civil suit in addition to the criminal charges. Papers were served, and suddenly Mike's arrogance began to crack. But even then, he could not stop lashing out. He went live on social media one night, standing outside my store with his wife and my mother silently behind him. I watched from the upstairs apartment as he ranted into his phone, calling me a parasite, accusing me of milking my daughter's death for sympathy, claiming I was destroying the family legacy. My mother stood there with her arms crossed, not saying a word, not stopping him. Her silence was an endorsement, her posture a betrayal louder than any words she could have spoken. They thought the live stream would rally sympathy, but instead it backfired. A local gossip blog picked it up, screen recording the entire thing before it was deleted. The headline ran the next morning: "Family feud turns legal as live stream meltdown adds fuel to fire." Strangers began to show up at my store, not to harass me, but to support me. Some asked if I was all right. Others purchased coffee and trinkets just to show solidarity. One woman left a handwritten note that read, "You handled this better than most would." Their attempt to shame me publicly had turned into my vindication. Still, the counterattacks did not stop. Mike left voicemails that shifted from pleading to threatening, sometimes within the same minute. His wife bombarded my email with accusations and demands. My mother left messages full of disappointment and religious guilt, reminding me of scriptures about forgiveness while ignoring the cruelty committed against me. They wanted me to break, to come crawling back to admit I had overreacted. But each insult, each broken window, each smear only strengthened my resolve. They thought I would fold under pressure, but what they did not understand was that I had already survived worse. I had buried my daughter. I had lived through the kind of grief that makes every other pain feel small. Compared to that, their games were nothing. And now, for once, the law was on my side. Uncle Ray kept reminding me of that. every time the fear threatened to creep in, he would point at the growing pile of evidence at the witness statements at the police reports. He would say, "Let them keep going, they are building the case for us." And he was right. With every rock, with every cruel word, with every smear, they were writing their own downfall. A few days after the live stream, when I thought the noise might finally be quieting down, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was another crank call stirred up by Mike's smears, but something stopped me. I pressed play and listened to a young voice hesitating on the other end. She said her name was Hannah. She explained that she used to work for Mike at his second shop, the one that had mysteriously closed down right after I pulled my name from the lease. Her voice shook as she said she was nervous to get involved, but that she could not keep quiet anymore. She had overheard a conversation weeks earlier, Mike talking to his wife about making me look unstable. At the time, she did not understand what he meant, but now she did. And then she said the words that made my breath catch. He smashed the second window himself. I replayed the message 3 times to be sure I heard it correctly. My hands trembled not with fear, but with vindication. For weeks they had painted me as the unstable one, as the liar, but now someone from their own side was confirming the truth. I called Hannah back immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice wavering. She told me she had texts and receipts evidence that backed up her claim. She said she had been too afraid to come forward, but watching what they were doing to me made her sick. She did not want to be complicit. I gave her my lawyer's contact, and within hours she sent over everything. That night, as I sat in my office going through the documents, a second message appeared, this time from a woman who had helped Mike's wife with her online boutique. She said she had seen fake invoices with my name on them, invoices sent to vendors claiming I was a co-partner. They had used my reputation to secure deals to get early shipments, even to scam refunds. My name had been their ticket to legitimacy, and they had exploited it shamelessly. A third message arrived later through my store's Instagram account, another former associate with more dirt. Each revelation piled higher until what had begun as a petty family feud was now shaping into a serious case of fraud and identity misuse. Uncle Ray came by the next morning, coffee in hand, and we went through it all together. His jaw tightened as he read, and when he finished, he called our lawyer without hesitation. By noon, the case had been amended. No longer was it just about vandalism and harassment. It was about fraud, misrepresentation, and deliberate attempts to sabotage me while profiting off my name. The shift was monumental. And just when I thought the storm could not intensify further, the real spectacle arrived. Late one night, my phone pinged with an alert from the security camera feed. I opened it, expecting maybe another rock or some graffiti, but what I saw made my stomach twist. Mike, his wife, and my mother stood outside my store. They were not hiding, not vandalizing, just standing there in the glow of the streetlight like figures from a nightmare. They stared in through the glass, unmoving, as though waiting for me to appear. Then Mike lifted his phone and started live streaming again. From the safety of my apartment above the shop, I watched as he spewed venom into the camera, calling me a parasite, accusing me of milking my daughter's death for attention, insisting I was unstable and dangerous. His wife nodded beside him, adding her own barbs, and my mother stood silently behind them, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but her presence spoke volumes. She did not stop him. She did not defend me. She lent her silence as an endorsement. My chest ached, but my resolve did not waver. I recorded the feed, called the police, and forwarded everything to my lawyer. Within an hour, the stream was taken down, but not before someone had screen recorded it and sent it to a local blog known for devouring messy family drama. By morning, the headline was everywhere. Family feud turns legal as live stream meltdown adds fuel to fire. For the first time, the wider community saw the ugliness I had endured in private. Customers streamed into my shop that day, some regulars, some strangers drawn by the article. They offered sympathy, encouragement, quiet nods of respect. One woman left a note on the counter that said simply, "You handled this better than most would." I tucked it into my pocket and kept working my hands steady. While my brother's voice spread poison, mine remained steady in action. Their attempt to paint me as unstable had flipped. Now they were the spectacle their cruelty exposed. Behind the scenes, the lawyer filed motions attaching the witness statements, the fraudulent invoices, the screen captures of the live stream. The pile of evidence grew taller each day. For once, the scale was tipping in my favor. Yet even as I stood in the light of truth, there was a shadow in my heart. Watching my mother stand there behind him, watching her choose silence over me was a wound deeper than any broken window. It was betrayal crystallized a confirmation that her loyalty would never be mine. She had chosen her golden son again, even if it meant destroying her daughter. But the betrayal no longer hollowed me out. Instead, it hardened me. Each time they thought they were burying me, they were planting the seeds of their own downfall. I realized the twist was not just the evidence that had come forward, not just the fraud revealed, not just the live stream turned against them. The true twist was me, the woman they thought would always sit quietly and smile, the woman they thought would always swallow humiliation was gone. In her place stood someone willing to fight with every tool of truth and law, and that was a battle they were not prepared for. The morning after the live stream was removed from the platform but immortalized on the gossip blog, I unlocked the shop as usual, expecting to find judgmental stares or whispers, but instead I was greeted by something entirely different. The bell above the door rang again and again as people filtered in, some old customers and some faces I had never seen before. They bought coffee, they browsed the shelves, they smiled at me with a kind of quiet solidarity. One woman lingered by the counter and slipped me a folded note before leaving. Later, when I opened it, I found the words written in a hurried scrawl. "You handled this better than most would." I placed the note in the same drawer where I kept receipts and invoices, but in my heart it sat higher than any sale. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of community on my side. The blog article spread quickly. The headline "Family Feud Turns Legal as Livestream Meltdown Adds Fuel to Fire" was irresistible to readers hungry for drama. But the difference was that the sympathy did not fall with them, it fell with me. Strangers emailed encouragement. Customers told me to stay strong. Neighbors waved in ways they never had before. The attempt to shame me had turned into a mirror reflecting their cruelty back at them. Mike and his wife realized too late what they had done. Within 2 days, a court summons arrived for them, charges of fraud, defamation, harassment, and damages stacked neatly on legal paper. Their lawyer reached out to mine almost immediately, suggesting a private settlement, a quiet resolution, if only I would drop the public claims. I refused without even speaking directly to them. My lawyer conveyed the message for me. This was not revenge, I told him. This was survival. They were the ones who lit the match, now they would stand in the fire. The days that followed were strangely calm. I went about my work, sweeping the shop floor, arranging displays, chatting with customers, but underneath the calm was an awareness that the story was no longer private. It had spilled into the public eye, and once that happens, there is no going back. For the first time, my family could not twist the narrative behind closed doors. The world had seen their faces, heard their words, read their accusations. The image of my mother standing silently behind Mike during that live stream was etched into the minds of everyone who watched. People asked quietly if that was really her, if she had really chosen to stand by while her son tore into his sister. I nodded without elaboration. The truth was already visible. It needed no commentary. My mother must have realized too, because she began calling again, her voicemails shifting in tone. At first, they were sharp with anger, accusing me of betrayal, claiming I was destroying the family. Then they softened, filled with pleas about forgiveness and reminders of childhood memories. But the effect was gone. Words were empty when actions had already revealed loyalty. I listened once, twice, then deleted without responding. Public exposure had done something I never could on my own. It had stripped away the masks. In the past, whenever they humiliated me, they always had the protection of denial. They could say I was too sensitive, that it was just a joke that I misinterpreted. But a live stream cannot be denied. A headline cannot be erased. A community watching cannot be gaslit. For the first time, their cruelty was undeniable. The shift in power was palpable. Mike no longer paced in front of my store. Tyler no longer mocked me online. Even their allies grew quieter. Rumors reached me that suppliers were reconsidering contracts with them, that the church community was whispering disapproval. They had always thrived on appearances, and now those appearances were tarnished. The exposure was not just about shaming them, it was about validation for me. For years, I had questioned myself, wondered if I had exaggerated, wondered if maybe I was the problem. But seeing strangers rally, hearing customers say they believed me, watching the narrative flip erased those doubts. I was not crazy. I was not unstable. I was not alone. The irony was that while they accused me of tearing the family apart, it was their own actions broadcast to the world that did it. They had destroyed themselves by revealing who they truly were. One evening, as I closed the register and counted bills, I paused and looked around the shop, the shelves lined with items, the walls hung with local art, the tables where people gathered to talk and laugh. This place was my testimony, built from the ground up with no handouts, no safety nets, no golden child privileges. And now the community saw it for what it was, not just a store, but a reflection of survival. I realized then that exposure was not the end, but the turning point. The evidence was already heavy against them, but the public eye ensured they could no longer manipulate or hide. Whatever happened next would unfold under scrutiny, and that gave me a calm strength I had never felt before. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish when I walked through the heavy wooden doors on the morning of the hearing. My lawyer walked beside me carrying a thick folder stuffed with exhibits, witness statements, and printed screenshots. Uncle Ray trailed close behind his presence, a steady anchor. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for weeks, telling myself to stand tall, to speak clearly, to let the truth carry its own weight. Still, my stomach twisted when I saw Mike and his wife already seated at the defendant's table. Tyler sat between them, his hood pulled up, though the bailiff told him twice to remove it. My mother sat behind them, her face drawn tight, refusing to look in my direction. It was all so familiar, the seating arrangements echoing family dinners where they clustered together and I sat apart. The judge entered robes sweeping and the room hushed. What followed felt both swift and endless. My lawyer presented the vandalism footage first, the grainy images of Tyler and his friend laughing as they spray-painted and smashed glass. The courtroom murmured, the sound of disbelief rippling across the benches. Then came the fraudulent invoices, my name printed across documents I had never signed, proof that they had used my reputation to secure deals and refunds. Next were the social media clips Mike's ranting live streams preserved forever on screens, each piece layered over the last until the weight became undeniable. When it was my turn to testify, I stood at the witness box, palms pressed against the railing, voice steady. I recounted the soda at the birthday party, the laughter, the humiliation. I described the vandalism, the threats, the rocks through my windows. I told the court about the messages from former employees, the fraudulent use of my name. Each word felt like pulling a stone from my chest and placing it on the pile of evidence before the judge. My lawyer asked careful questions, guiding me through without embellishment. Then the defense rose. Mike's attorney tried to twist the narrative, suggesting I had provoked the family, that I had exaggerated, that I had retaliated out of bitterness. He asked why I had not cut ties sooner, why I had allowed my name on documents if I did not approve. His words dripped with insinuation, but I held firm. I said because I trusted my family, because I thought blood meant loyalty, because I wanted to believe they would not betray me. The courtroom was silent as my words settled. Then it was Mike's turn. He strode to the witness stand with false confidence, gesturing dramatically as he spoke. He painted himself as a devoted son, burdened by a resentful sister. He said the soda was a joke, the vandalism a misunderstanding, the invoices an error. He said I was unstable, that grief over my daughter had clouded my judgment. At one point, he even turned to me directly, his voice rising, accusing me of trying to destroy the family out of jealousy. The judge cut him off sharply, reminding him to answer questions, not give speeches. His wife followed, echoing his claims, tears welling conveniently at the right moments. She said Tyler was just a boy, that charges would ruin his future. She blamed me for everything, her voice trembling with practiced outrage. When Tyler was called, he slouched in the seat, muttered half answers, denied what was plain on video. The judge watched him carefully, eyes narrowing. Then came the witnesses. Hannah spoke quietly but firmly about overhearing Mike plan to make me look unstable. The boutique assistant confirmed the fake invoices. The gossip blogger verified the live stream footage was authentic and unedited. Piece by piece, the puzzle locked together. By afternoon, closing arguments were delivered. My lawyer's voice was calm, methodical, laying out the facts in order, pointing to each exhibit, reminding the court that this was not about petty family drama, but about accountability. The defense sputtered through last attempts at painting me as vindictive, but the weight of evidence had already spoken louder. The judge called a recess, and I stepped outside into the crisp air, lungs expanding for what felt like the first time in months. Uncle Ray squeezed my shoulder. "You did well," he said simply. When we returned, the judge delivered the ruling. His voice was measured but firm. He acknowledged the overwhelming evidence of vandalism, fraud, and harassment. He dismissed the defense claims of instability as unfounded. He ordered restitution for damages to my property, fines for fraudulent use of my name, community service for Tyler under strict supervision, and a restraining order against further harassment from Mike and his wife. My mother gasped audibly but remained silent otherwise. The gavel struck and it was over. Relief flooded me, but so did grief. I had won in the eyes of the law, but the cost was permanent fracture. There would be no going back, no holiday dinners, no pretense of family unity. They had chosen their path, and now I had chosen mine. As I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, strangers who had followed the case nodded at me, some even clapped softly. I did not smile, but I lifted my head higher. Justice had not erased the pain, but it had drawn a line. They could not cross it again without consequence. That was enough. The days after the verdict passed in a strange haze of exhaustion and clarity. For the first time in months, I slept without jolting awake at every sound outside. The restraining order meant that if Mike or his wife came near the shop or my apartment, the police would intervene. Tyler's community service was scheduled, and though I did not rejoice at the idea of him scrubbing graffiti or picking up trash, I hoped the hours of labor would etch into his mind the weight of his actions. Restitution payments began slowly, small checks arriving through the lawyer's office, each one a reminder that the law had sided with me. But the emotional aftermath was far more complex than the legal one. Customers kept coming, many of them offering congratulations, some leaving cards or flowers on the counter. I accepted with quiet gratitude, but inside I was untangling knots that had formed over a lifetime. The greatest ache came not from Mike's fury, but from my mother's silence. After the ruling, she had left the courtroom without a word, her shoulders stiff, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Since then, she had not called. No voicemails filled with guilt. No pleas for forgiveness, just a hollow absence. Part of me had hoped the exposure, the evidence, the judgment would snap her awake, that she would finally see the cruelty she had defended. Instead, she retreated deeper into denial. It was a wound that would never quite close, but I began to understand that closure was not the goal. Survival was. Uncle Ray checked on me daily, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting with a cup of coffee in silence. His presence reminded me that blood ties were not the only definition of family. Friends stopped by too, some from church, some from the business community. They told me I had shown courage, that I had set an example. I did not feel like a hero, just a woman who refused to disappear. Yet slowly, I recognized that my refusal had mattered. The store thrived in the weeks after the trial. Sales doubled as people who had read the blog or seen the live streams came to support. Local artists asked if they could display their work on my walls. A book club started meeting in the corner on Thursday evenings, their laughter spilling out onto the sidewalk. The place that had once been my refuge had become a community hub, and with every customer I felt steadier on my feet. But there were shadows too. I caught whispers that Mike was still spinning stories, telling anyone who would listen that I had ruined him. Some believed him, some did not. It no longer mattered. The power of his words had been broken in court and in public. I did not need to defend myself anymore. One evening, as I closed the register, I thought about the girl I had been, the one who had sat quietly through every insult, every dismissal, every cruel laugh. That girl had believed silence was survival. but I had learned that silence only feeds cruelty. Speaking up, pressing charges, exposing the truth had not been easy, but it had been necessary. The aftermath was not a perfect victory. I had lost the family I once longed for, but I had gained something else, something sturdier: peace, respect, and the knowledge that I could stand alone without collapsing. I pinned the rock with the cruel note still attached to my office wall, not as a reminder of fear, but as proof of what I had endured and overcome. It sat beside the folded note from the customer that read, "You handled this better than most would." Side by side, they told the story of who I was and who I had become. In the quiet of those evenings with the shop empty and the lights dimmed, I whispered to myself a truth I had finally accepted. Blood may bind, but it does not define. Family is found in those who stand with you, not those who tear you down. That was my aftermath, not an ending, but a beginning. Months passed and the rhythms of life settled into something new. The shop hummed with steady business, its tables filled with conversations and laughter that reminded me daily that community can grow from the ashes of betrayal. I expanded the menu slightly, adding homemade pastries that sold out before noon most days. On weekends, children came in clutching coins to buy small trinkets, their eyes wide, as though my little shop were a treasure chest. Each smile, each thank you was a stitch repairing the fabric of my heart. Mike and his family faded into the background, their noise reduced to occasional rumors I barely noticed. My mother never reached out again. At first, her silence gnawed at me, but eventually I saw it for what it was, not a wound, but a release. She had chosen her loyalty, and in doing so, she had freed me from the exhausting hope that one day she would change. The absence became space, and in that space, I built something stronger. Uncle Ray remained close, his support a reminder that kinship is measured by actions, not by titles. Sometimes he would sit at the counter and shake his head in wonder at how far things had come. "You turned pain into foundation," he said once, and I carried those words with me like armor. Looking back, I realized the story was never just about soda spilled in my lap, or broken windows, or fraudulent invoices. Those were sparks, painful but fleeting. The real story was about reclaiming dignity after years of being told I had none. It was about refusing to be the family scapegoat any longer. The court documents lay filed away in a cabinet, their pages marked with official stamps, but the true victory was visible in simpler ways: the way I held my head high walking down the street, the way neighbors smiled, the way my shop thrived as a place of warmth and respect. The moral crystallized slowly but firmly. Family is not guaranteed by blood. It is earned through loyalty, kindness, and respect. And when those are absent, it is not weakness to walk away. It is survival. I used to believe cutting ties was failure, that enduring cruelty was the price of belonging. Now I know the opposite is true. Belonging is not worth buying at the cost of your own soul. I share my story not to wallow in bitterness, but to remind anyone listening that you are allowed to stand up, to fight back, to protect yourself, even when the ones hurting you share your last name. Justice is not always swift, but when truth is carried into the light, it has power. No lie can smother. My journey was scarred with betrayal, but it ended with freedom, and that is enough.